Ecuador, Equator, Quito, Mitad del Mundo, back in Quito, Riobamba, and back in Quito. Quito. Landing in Quito was a massive clusterfuck. I didn't know how something as simple as debarking a plane and picking up luggage could turn into a swarm of chaos. It must be said that the old Mariscal Sucre International Airport, which I had just landed at, was not only busting at the seams, but at the time was one of the busiest airports in South America, handling over 6 million passengers a year. Many passengers, it appeared, were flying for the first time. My advantage was my height. As the typical Ecuadorian was only 5'4". I could see over the mass of people as I waited in immigration to get my stamp. I had spent a lot of time in airports. As the son of a pilot, I took full advantage of the perks the airlines offered their employees and family. I had the passcode to the crew lounge for Republic Airlines, formerly North Central, later acquired by Northwest, now owned by Delta. Republic Airlines crew lounge code in the 1980s? 1, 2, 3, 4. The word lounge conjures up some luxurious place with chandeliers and champagne. Fact is, it was a rather unattractive place that had a small TV mounted in a corner displaying live national weather conditions, a beat-up P-LAM counter where pilots could get their flight information, and metal shelves holding flight bags, each made unique by a sticker of the equipment the pilot flew or their initials embossed below the handle. Those were different times. Smoking and non-smoking sections on planes, cockpit doors were left open, and if you scored an aisle seat, you could watch the takeoff and landing through the cockpit window. Mid-flight, pilots would wander down the aisle, shaking hands with the passengers, handing out plastic wings to kids, and sharing smiles. I once got to sit in the co-pilot seat during a flight and scored the jump seat a few times, which was a little-known seat that allowed an extra person to sit in the cockpit. One of the great perks of being the son of a commercial pilot was flying non-revenue or non-rev. I could grab a ticket, right in the departing airport and destination airport, and off I went. The downside of flying non-rev was that I could only get on the plane if there happened to be an extra seat left. If there were 4 non-revs waiting to board, it went by date of hire. My dad's hire date gave me a leg up, but my dad was very strict about this. If there was a pilot or flight attendant in uniform and I was offered the seat before them because of his hire date, I would, without question, give the seat to the uniformed crew member. If I wasn't able to get on the last flight of the day, I slept on the floor or on a bench. I bought food from vending machines with the 25-cent return refunds I collected from returning luggage carts. It was a lot of fun being in the airport at night with just the cleaning crew, a sort of teenage version of Mehran Karimi Nasseri, an Iranian refugee who lived in Charles de Gaulle Airport from August 1988 until July 2006. Non-rev also meant I had to wear a button-up shirt, tie, dress shoes, and slacks. I was 18 when my dad stopped giving me passes. The first flight I took paying full fare, I wore flip-flops, shorts, and a t-shirt, a practice I continue to this day. Edward disappeared at immigration. As a citizen, he was able to skip the gringo line and headed for the doors. Whether or not he ditched me on purpose so as not to have to pay me back the $10 I gave him at the airport in Caracas, or the mob swallowed him up and we simply disconnected, really didn't matter. My only disappointment was missing out on an authentic Ecuadorian Christmas with his family. As it stood, I was going to be alone for Christmas. The gauntlet of taxi drivers congregated and aggressively pursued all those who exited El Aeropuerto, but gringos like me were an easy target and a triple charge. The words, "My friend, you need a taxi," and "Come with me, very cheap," repeated in a round. I always sought out the taxi driver least interested, sometimes sleeping in his car. In Latin America, taxi driving was a male-dominated sport. I found myself at a makeshift hostel, guided there by my Lonely Planet, South America on a Shoestring guidebook. It was an abandoned university that rented out their dorm rooms by night. The place was sterile and empty. No doubt I was the only person there aside from the student who showed me to my dorm bed and the silhouette of a janitor. Or perhaps the ghost of a janitor who now wandered the halls after an accidental death of an exploding boiler. Either way, I never saw it or him again. Day one was hammering out a couple of chores. First things first. I went to the U.S. Embassy to get pages added to my passport. As it stood, immigration officers were stamping stamps over stamps in my passport, and I was thinking about visiting Brazil, which required 2 empty pages for the visa. The U.S. Embassy had a line around it of Ecuadorians trying to get visas to travel to the United States. A simple way to take measure of a country is to look at how many want in and how many want out. Tony Blair. I approached the guard booth at the embassy. Is this the line to get into the embassy? Sir, are you a citizen of the United States? Yes, I am. I was just getting in line. That line is for non-citizens, sir. Please come with me. Really? Yes. What is the nature of your business? Passport. I ran out of pages. Please follow me. He brought me to a small waiting room. No one else was in there. A woman behind the counter and a wall of bulletproof glass asked what I needed. Passport pages. I heard I can have pages added to my passport. Sure, I can do that for you. Please have a seat. She took my passport and returned less than 10 minutes later. My passport had doubled in thickness. Amazing. I thought I would be here all day. I found a taxi driver who agreed to take me to a few motorcycle shops in town. Even the used motorcycles were expensive. Finally, I had him drop me off at a bar, where I enjoyed a few beers and hammered out my next move. My next move was the internet cafe next door. After composing a status email to friends and family, I thought about things I wanted to do. Buy a motorcycle, too expensive. Buy a bicycle, Run a marathon. There it was. I had run marathons before, so I searched for marathons happening this time of year in South America. Marathon running wasn't as big in South America, so the options were slim pickings, but one stood out. Antarctica Marathon, March 2002. The marathon was sold as a package, which in a nutshell was as follows. First, depart country of origin. Second, group arrives in Buenos Aires. Third, group flies to Ushuaia and boards ship. Fourth, ship goes to Antarctica and returns to Ushuaia. And finally, group flies back to Buenos Aires, then onto their country of origin. After a few back-and-forth emails, the race director agreed to discount my cost if I met them in Ushuaia, charging me for just the voyage by sea across the Drake Passage. 7 days, 6 nights, $2,800. It was a hefty chunk of change, but I pulled the trigger. I mean, it's Antarctica. I had 3 months to get to Ushuaia and more than enough time to train. My days were pretty empty. What else was I going to do? The marathon gave me a goal, something to strive for, a destination, a timeline. One could only roam without purpose for so long. Our nature was to be productive, contribute in some way. I hadn't done much of that over the past few months, but then I thought about life before the bike trip, before the bus to Mexico, and further on south to my present location. How did this happen? Back on the streets, I found an open market which offered everything from alpaca blankets to spatulas to DVD players to fried goods to bootlegged CDs. A Chilean band by the name of La Ley was currently all the rage. ¿Tiene la ley? I asked the bootleg CD vendor. ¿Cómo? ¿La ley? ¿Tiene? Was I asking this wrong? ¿Cómo? La ley. ¿Tiene la ley? No entiendo. La ley? I didn't know how many different ways I could say la ley. I shuffled through the CDs and, sure enough, found a La Ley CD and showed the vendor. Oh, La Ley, si tengo La Ley. I also grabbed Blink 182, Green Day, and Manu Chao. Pages added to passport. Done. Beers consumed. Done. Motorcycle purchase. On hold. Marathon registration. Done. I jumped on a local bus that I was told would lead me to another bus that would take me to Mitad del Mundo. On the bus, I found a seat next to a professionally dressed woman somewhere in her 50s and asked if I could sit next to her. You are American? Yes. Why are you here? She seemed annoyed. What? Oh, I don't know. I suppose I just decided to travel, and I suppose I just happened to find myself here on this bus next to you in Quito. Ah, America. She raised her arms in the air and looked up, as if praying to a higher power. Why would you want to leave to come here? Why would anyone want to leave? It is the Garden of Eden. I hope one day to live there. Well, it's definitely got its perks, but the world is big and I'm just taking it all in. She shook her head disapprovingly. If I lived in America, I would never leave. God made America. It is heaven on earth. Have you been? Yes, just once. Have you tried to become a citizen? Yes, I tried once and was denied. Why not try again? We can only try twice, and then you can never try again. I have decided not to try ever again. Why? Because if I am denied again, I know I will never be able to live in America. But if I never apply, I can live my life knowing one day I could become a citizen. She was a lawyer, one of the first female lawyers to manage a law firm in Ecuador. She had only one dream in her life, and that was, in case you hadn't guessed, to return to and live in the United States. It's a crapshoot in the wheel of life, isn't it? Two random people connect, have sex, and boom, there you are. Born in a clean hospital or a hut in Mongolia. Rich or oppressed, blind or with sight, healthy or with cancer. I suppose in the scheme of things, aside from my receding hairline, I was pretty lucky. White, male, stunningly handsome, sort of smart, healthy enough to have biked from Minneapolis to Truckee, and born in a country that offered a passport, giving me access to almost any country in the world. You learned very quickly that you literally jump off the bus in Quito. It might slow down to 3 or 5 miles per hour, but stopping? Stopping only happens when an elderly woman was getting on or off, out of respect. It was also expected that if a woman got on a bus, no matter how old, the male would, without a second thought, give up their seat. At least in 2001, that was how it was. Mitad del Mundo, middle of the world. Mitad del Mundo was a giant monolithic monument with a sphere on top standing 98 feet tall, put there by the French, albeit in the wrong place. This little detail, for the most part, was unknown to most, if not all, of the tourists who came to straddle the big, bold line representing the equator. At the time, I was one of those tourists. I meandered around the campus, which included a museum and a gift shop with a stamp allowing you to stamp your passport, if you so choose, to prove you were there. Although I did believe this was not legal to do, I proceeded in the task. I noticed a building off to the side of the monument and decided to give the knob a turn. The door opened. The room was darkly lit, and shelves held Incan relics. In the middle of the room was a table about 4 foot by 4 foot with a map. I walked around the map on the table. Quito was placed in the middle with lines drawn projecting in different directions. They seemed random, yet the angles seemed consistent. The northernmost part of the map was Mexico DF. The southernmost was mid-Argentina. What happened next was possibly the most fantastic thing I learned on this entire trip. The Earth rotated in space, angled at 23.5 degrees. This gave us the seasons in different hemispheres. We all learned that in science class back in the day. When you look at a piece of Incan art, such as a rug, for example, you would see a consistent pattern at an angle. That angle was approximately 23.5 degrees. So, did the Inca know what angle our big blue planet sat at in the universe? Think about this. In Chichen Itza, the temple of Kukulkan, Mayan for feathered serpent, was a four-sided pyramid. The temple had 91 steps on each side, with the final platform on top totaling 365 steps, which equaled the number of days in the year. Because of its design and precise location, on the spring and fall equinoxes, the sun hits the temple and casts a shadow, giving the illusion of a serpent slithering down the temple. So could the Inca have known the angle at which the Earth sat in space? Moving around the map, lines were drawn, interestingly, from where the actual Mitad del Mundo was. Actual? Wasn't I at the actual Mitad del Mundo? I mean, there was a big stripe painted outside representing the equator, a gift shop, touristy things. It turned out the Inca nailed it. Not too far away, found by the use of GPS, was Cataquilla. Cataquilla, in Quechua, means follower of the moon. At Cataquilla was a semicircle wall, and at the center of the circle was the Mitad del Mundo. At one end was the equator. The two ends of the wall, it so happened, created a 23.5-degree angle, with one end of the wall aligning with the rising sun of the winter solstice and the other end aligning with the setting sun of the summer solstice. At that point, Cataquilla was placed on the map that I was staring at, and from there, more lines were drawn. One line along the equator, and another perpendicular to the equator at Cataquilla. From there, lines drawn at 23.5 degrees extended straight to Quito, Machu Picchu, Chichen Itza, and Washington, D.C., which was laid out, some say, by the Masons. The whole experience was amazing. My mind was buzzing. Although I was seeing this play out, I simply couldn't grasp the complexity of it all. To go one step further, when the Spanish arrived in Quito, they built churches over the heathen Inca structures, which all aligned with the solstice. In December, the sun penetrated the cupola of the Church of San Francisco, which strikes a triangle above the altar. As the day progresses, the light moves down and creates a glow on the face of the image entitled God the Father. This happens on the winter solstice. Mind blown. Back in Quito, I found a black market to buy a new pair of running shoes, Adidas knockoffs, for $10. I then went for a 30-minute run, climbed a few hundred stairs to start my training, and played football with some kids in an alley before heading back to my sterile hostel on the empty university campus. I decided to leave for Riobamba in the morning, just 3.5 hours south of Quito, which would take me along the Avenue of Volcanoes. I read about an epic train ride that seemed like a good way to see a little more of the countryside and have a new experience. The city of Quito is surrounded by 6 volcanoes. Volcan Cotacachi, which last erupted in 950 BC, Volcan Pichincha, Volcan Cayambe, Volcan Antisana, Volcan Sincholagua, and Cotopaxi, which last erupted in 2016. We passed Cotopaxi with its impressive stature, rising 19,340 feet and piercing the dark blue sky with its snow-capped peak. Even before the Inca conquered the Quechua, they considered Cotopaxi a sacred mountain, home to the gods. The land was rolling and full of farming, along with smatterings of beaten-down restaurants, homes, vendors, mercados, and shelters dotting the landscape. Buses didn't travel fast in Ecuador, but depending on what you were willing to spend, they could be clean and comfortable. Just after the city of Ambato to the west was Volcan Chimborazo, last eruption 550 AD. When I was in my teens, we went to the big island of Hawaii to visit some friends of my parents. It was an eye-opening experience in so many ways. First was the size of the plane. I had flown almost exclusively on DC-9s. This was a DC-10. It could hold up to 380 passengers, twice that of a DC-9, and had 3 rows across and sections, each with its own movie screen. On one trip to Hawaii, my little brother got lost coming back from the lavatory. Attention passengers, we have a lost, blue-eyed, blonde-haired boy looking for his parents. You could hear him crying in the background. Second was flying over an ocean. This was a bit intimidating the first time. Looking out from 30,000 feet and seeing only clouds and ocean was surreal when it was your first time. I mean, if you had engine problems up here, there was no emergency landing strip. At this point, one put a lot of faith in the pilots and the engineers. No matter how expensive the equipment, it always comes down to a 5-cent washer and a 27-cent bolt to hold an engine on. Among the many things I learned while in Hawaii was that Mauna Kea was actually the tallest mountain in the world when measured from base to peak. Its base was at the bottom of the ocean and put Mauna Kea at 33,500 feet. Everest was the highest altitude above sea level at 29,029 feet. The top of Volcan Chimborazo, however, was not the highest or the tallest, but it was the furthest point from the center of the Earth and the closest point on the Earth to space, beating out Everest by 1.5 miles because of Earth's centrifugal bulge. Oh, and just in case you were wondering, the shortest mountain in the world was Mount Wycheproof, standing proudly at 141 feet in Wycheproof, Australia. Riobamba, River Plain. Arriving just after 11:30 a.m., I found La Mansión Santa Isabela, a run-down Spanish colonial building. I was amazed at the tremendous attention to architectural detail that went into all these buildings, the colors, the accents. Sadly, most of these hundreds of years old buildings haven't had the opportunity of continuous maintenance. I still marveled at the detail put into everything from the ornate millwork of the check-in counter to the elaborate door hinges. I suppose with forced labor, in this case the Spanish used the indigenous people, one could build cities and erect grand cathedrals to the god the Spanish introduced to the conquered people. The woman who checked me in was from Slovakia. She had been in Riobamba for about a month, earning money working at the Mansion for a free room and money so she could continue traveling. How much for a room? For how many hours? I was confused by the question. Hours? I don't know. I would like to stay the night. Okay, $8. She wrote my passport number down, standard procedure, and gave me the key. Upstairs, the room above us, room 7. Thank you. Do you happen to know where the nearest ATM is? Banco Pichincha is just around the corner. What's going on? A rather important looking parade was going on just outside. Some sort of religious event? The street outside was chock full of people and a long procession of odd costumes that were dancing and walking and twirling. The stairs and floors all creaked when I walked to my room. The walls were cracked from centuries of settling and lack of attention. The bed sagged. There was a small wooden table and chair and a small balcony that overlooked Avenue José Veloz, which was abundantly busy along the cobblestone street, now packed with thousands celebrating El Pase del Niño. The shared bathroom was down the hall. El Pase del Niño celebration was a mixture of the imported Catholic religion combined with Andean ancestral mythology and pagan traditions. Like voodoo, with its marriage of Catholicism and traditional religions of West Africa, these celebrations and beliefs became muddy yet wondrous and curious and mystical. As I was sitting on the corner watching the parade, a young Ecuadorian sat next to me. "Excuse me, do you speak English?" he asked. "Yes." I had no interest in engaging. "I am a student and am studying English. I would like to pay you to teach me English." "I'm not really a teacher. I wouldn't know where to begin." "I would just like to have a conversation. Practice English. Is that okay? We can go to your hotel." I had heard of the many scams one might come across in South America. I didn't blame them, really. I mean, they were just trying to make money. They had nothing. Well, nothing in relation to most backpackers. I mean, if you had the means to travel internationally, no matter the shoestring budget, you were clearly better off than many of the occupants of the country you were visiting. The scam that was being set up now was, he convinces me to go to my room, his friends follow in the shadows, and once in the room, they jump me and steal everything. I can talk to you here if you want to practice English. He really pressed going back to my room. I finally just ignored him, and after about 5 minutes, he stood up. He looked at me and said, "Pendejo," then walked away. Pfft, Pendejo. I've been called worse, I thought. It ain't what they call you, it's what you answer to. W.C. Fields. By South American standards, I was off to bed early. For the first time since I left Minneapolis, and still without a watch, I could accurately tell the time in the morning and evening. Here at the equator, the sun rises about 6 a.m. and sets around 6 p.m. every day of the year, give or take a few minutes. No need to impress you, the reader, with my sun wizardry. Back in the room, perhaps 30 minutes later, I realized something unusual about the Mansion Santa Isabella. There was an unusual amount of foot traffic inside the mansion. Doors were constantly opening and shutting. I could hear couples giggling as they walked up and then later back down the creaky floors to their rooms. The walls were thin, and the sounds of sex could be heard through the cracked walls. It was the college dorms all over again. Now I understood why the Slovakian receptionist asked how many hours I wanted the room. The rooms were rented out by the hour for the sole purpose of sex. These hotels were called sex hotels. People have sex. It's no big secret. It's an urge that is sometimes greater than hunger, especially as a horny teenager or 20-something. Oh, who am I kidding? At any age. In South America, life was a tad different. People usually didn't move out of their parents' house until they were married, so if you wanted to have sex, you were going to need a place. These hotels provided the perfect solution for those concerned about having a good reputation. Everyone knew everyone else was having sex, but no one really talked about it. Where were the philandering husbands supposed to take their mistresses? They couldn't just take them home, now, could they? It didn't take long to realize the whole Latino lover was an exaggeration. Pay for an hour to last just 2 to 3 minutes. Poor girl. Apparently, foreplay wasn't a Latino thing. At the bus station, I ran into a couple of backpackers coming back from the Devil's Nose train ride, which was the whole point of me coming here. They informed me the train only runs 2 days a week, and the next time it departed was in 5 days. Disappointing news, to say the least. The trip to Riobamba wasn't an entire waste. I got to see a little of Riobamba, drive along the Avenue of Volcanoes, experience a love hotel, and El Pase del Niño celebration. Back in Quito, I found a livelier hostel. It was Christmas Eve. My new roommates were 2 Aussies, 3 Brits, 2 other U.S. Americans, brother and sister Ross and Rachel. Finally, there was another English woman with her newly acquired Quechua boyfriend. The pair had just returned from the Amazon, and she was recovering from some jungle ailment. She was horribly ill and covered in hickeys, which she was more than eager to show. The hickeys were scattered around her body, given to her by the elder women of the jungle community, who attempted to suck the evil, the illness, out of her. Did it work? Well, she was still sick, and the ayahuasca journey didn't seem to heal her. The hostel owner brought a couple of us some gifts: cocaine and weed. We, in turn, supplied alcohol: bottles of vodka, Jameson, Glenlivet, and several bottles of wine, along with more mind-altering substances for the present group. The hostel owner locked the doors and turned up the music. Manu Chao was his preferred music for the evening, with a few Christmas songs. I believe Fairy Tale of New York by the Pogues was played no less than 4 times. Each time, we drunkenly sang arm in arm. It was Christmas Eve, babe, in the drunk tank. An old man said to me, "Won't see another one." And then he sang a song, "The Rare Old Mountain Dew." I turned my face away and dreamed about you. We danced the night away in a sort of fantastic drug and alcohol-induced haze. I'd love to be able to tell you more about the evening, but all I could tell you for sure was I woke up to the sound of sex coming from the bunk below me. Santa brought your hero a hangover. Merry Christmas, 2001. Around 10 a.m., we gathered in the lobby of the hostel. It was decided the night before that we would treat ourselves to the Christmas buffet at the Hilton to celebrate the holiday. The topic of conversation was sharing what our memorable family traditions were. After the buffet, we all returned to the hostel and napped. The next day, many left to new destinations and adventures. We stayed in touch via email. It just so happened that 10 years later, Rachel emailed me to tell me she ran into the Australian guy at a coffee shop in Santiago, Chile. I had wanted to go to the Galapagos and do some diving. However, after spending $2,800 for the Antarctica adventure, I decided to be frugal and vow to return. The Galapagos and wildlife would be there, if the Chinese didn't poach all the wildlife first, which the Chilean Navy had caught them doing. I headed out for a run. Rachel asked to join, and we ran through and around Parque La Carolina. Paved trails weaved through the 165-acre park in the middle of Quito. We ran past a water park, the botanical and Japanese gardens, and along the boulevard of the flowers that opened into a giant green field, surrounded by a running track guarded by a statue of Ecuador's only Olympic medalist, Jefferson Perez. He took gold for race walking in Atlanta in 1996 and then won the silver in Beijing in 2008. Continuing north, off to the left of the trail, a tad bit out of place, a DC-6 airplane, artistically graffitied, sat on a concrete slab. An odd thing to see in such a wonderful park. I asked back at the hostel about its significance. The hostel owner didn't even know there was a DC-6 covered with graffiti in the park. Reaching the end of the park at Avenida Naciones Unidas, we ran east and then back south on different trails to see more of the park. The 3-mile run was not too bad considering we were at 9,300 feet in elevation. During our run, we hatched a plan. Her brother Ross and the two of us would hightail it to Cusco, Peru for New Year's. We heard it was quite a celebration. I had also learned that Robin and Nikki, who I met in Mexico and traveled a little around Guatemala with, would be there. It was just one small objective inside one greater one. Ormeño Bus Lines boasted having the longest bus route in the world. Over 3,850 miles. You could travel from Lima, Peru to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, at the time of my trip. So when I bought my ticket from Quito to Tumbes, Peru, you'd have thought the company that boasted the longest bus route in the world would have change for $5. Keep the change, I conceded to the woman selling me my ticket. She was a bit flustered by the gesture. I don't think people did that, but it was like 75 cents she owed me, and I didn't want to wait around while she found someone with actual change. Bus to Peru. Rachel, Ross, and I gathered our rucksacks along with Russ's guitar and headed to the bus estacion for a night bus to Tumbes. It would be roughly a 14-hour bus ride. The road took us back through the Avenue of Volcanoes, stopping in Riobamba. The waning gibbous moon shed a gentle light over the spine of Ecuador's Andean range. We stopped in Riobamba for about 30 minutes to unload and load passengers, stretch the legs, and seek out refreshments and snacks peddled by the dozens of Quechua women. I asked the bus driver at the time. He said 1:30, 1:30. From Riobamba to La Troncal, we dropped over 12,800 feet in elevation over a distance of 100 miles. For the time being, the Andes were behind us, and Ecuador's humid coastal flatlands spread around us as far as you could see. Palm trees and fruit crops hugged the road. The windows were wet with dew from the humidity. The sun was just rising as we reached Naranjal. By the time we reached immigration in Huaquilla, it was close to noon, if I were to guess. Time didn't matter anymore. It hadn't mattered for almost 4 months. Aside from bus and airplane departure times, time didn't exist. The whole scene was overwhelming, warm and humid. Smells of amazing foods and urine intertwined with the lingering smell of fires that seemed to just constantly burn. Garbage lined the streets as hundreds of vendors sold fruits, vegetables, meat, clothes, and an assortment of trinkets and household wares. We walked down the crowded street, and as the only gringos on the bus, it was pretty obvious with the large backpacks, blonde hair, and Ross's guitar that we weren't from around here. With that came the unwanted swarm of new amigos. Our mission was to get across the border and then off to Tumbes, Peru, where we would figure out our next steps. Immigration in Ecuador was quick and without any hassle, made slightly easier when one of the passengers showed us where the immigration office was, as it was not at all obvious. I still had plenty of time on my visa, and they required no departure tax from U.S. Americans. Getting the Peru stamp was a bit more of a head-scratcher. You'd think that next to Ecuador immigration, there would then be the Peruvian immigration office. Stamp stamped, and off you'd go. Not here, not at this La Frontera. There was no fence, no police, no border control, no indication of any sense of order. We just stood there with our passports in some sort of no man's land. We had no stamp in our passport that would prove we were here or there or anywhere. When buying the ticket, it was either made clear and I didn't understand her, or it wasn't made clear, and I simply assumed when buying our bus tickets that once at the Ecuadorian border, the bus stops, we disembark in an orderly manner, and wait in line. Then we'd be directed to the Peruvian immigration, reload the bus, and it'd be all wine and roses. Apparently, the bus didn't even cross the border. And aside from having no clue what to do next, we had to find transport to continue to Tumbes. I didn't know if I was upset or amused. It was midday. We stuck out for sure. 3 tall blonde people with backpacks and a guitar with a look of wonderment in our eyes and confusion on our faces. An old man passed us, struggling to push a wheelbarrow full of pineapples up a small incline. Ross and I helped him to his final destination, 100 feet down the road. A beer sounded good right about now, as did an empanada. While looking for where I might acquire such a wonderful meal, a man approached us with purpose. "Amigos, I can take you across the border. Inmigración Policia is almost 2 kilometers away." We looked at each other, waiting for one of us to make a decision. We all stood indifferent. I spotted a vendor with empanadas. "It's very hot. I charge only $10. $10? Our bus ride from Quito was less than $5. How about $3? $1 for each of us." "You have a lot of bags." "Okay, $5. I assumed he didn't have change. "Okay, $5. My car is here. Vamos." His car was an old station wagon, and in just a few minutes he dropped us off at Control de Migraciones in Zarumilla, Peru.